welcome to VistaTalks, interesting discussions with interesting people from all around the world. I'm your host for today, Priscilla Charles, and I'm delighted to be joined in studio by two very special guests today. Kyle Hegarty, Managing Director at TSL Marketing and author of Amazon's hit book called The Accidental Business Nomad, a survival guide for working across a shrinking planet. So welcome, Kyle. Good luck to you today. And Michael J. Asquith from Vistatec, our very own Michael. So both Michael and Kyle met by accident as global business nomads during the pandemic, with a slightly skewed commonality of working closely with Asia-based organizations for the better part of over a decade. So Kyle, obviously from the perspective of an expat, and Michael having the experience of working in the USA for Asia-based service solution providers. Those providers who would want to grow their business, for instance, helping USA-based international to globalize their business, product services, and associated content. So without further ado, I'm going to start with Kyle and ask you a few questions to get to know you a little better. And for our audience who wouldn't be familiar with you, can you share a little bit about your background, maybe? I understand you study international relations and economics, but how did you come to be so focused on helping people work globally?
How did I become focused on helping people work globally? It was entirely selfish. That sounds like such a positive question. I was my own first client. So I moved over to Asia, to Singapore 15 years ago, almost to this month, actually. And started hiring people. I was setting up a business, a marketing agency. I was hiring people around Singapore and the region, and I was managing people the way I was used to managing people. I hired them the way I was used to. I handled clients the way I was used to. And all three of those things didn't really work. And I had to do some very quick and expensive soul searching to figure out what was going wrong. And more often than not, it came back that it was a culture gap. There was an issue from a culture perspective, and we can dig into that. But over the years, as I researched it, used myself as really my own first test case, I began realizing that everybody else was going through very similar problems. So, you talk to any expat who's been outside of wherever country they've been living from for more than a week or so, and the heads all start nodding, and they've got this same challenge, the same thing. It's hard to put your head around. You're hard to define because a lot of it's invisible and difficult.
Of course.
And it seemed to me that there was two things, quite frankly. One was you're Europeans. One, there was a business opportunity, quite frankly. Business is about finding gaps problems you can solve. And it seemed like because everybody else was going through this problem, there was an opportunity there. But two, what a great type of way to pivot a career to actually do something I think positive and helpful. I've got nothing against my marketing agency and the work that I was doing, but you talk about the things that get me up in the morning and get me excited about stuff. And I love this topic, and I love the communication stuff so much more than some of the other things that I was doing. So it does feel like more energizing and exciting to be able to help companies and people to figure this stuff out.
Yeah.
Especially in this day and age. I mean, there's so much need for it.
Of course, yeah, that's not necessarily something that that everybody understands right away, and that needs time, and you need to have someone who can understand and to be in someone else's shoes and living this.
Yeah. Absolutely. So again, I did not step into this with any good intentions. It was purely selfish. So I just want to be clear. I'm very selfish.
I'm sure everyone is grateful. Well, thank you so much, Kyle. So then moving on to your professional journey, you took on different roles and then you with several organizations before joining TSL Global Sales, right? And marketing department in 2001. And now, as we mentioned, you're the managing director of TSL Marketing, and you help companies expand and develop their footprint in Asia Pacific markets. So can you tell us a little bit about the organization, maybe, and I understand so you're based out of Singapore. That's where you are now.
Still here. Yeah, been here
Okay.
in lockdown. I can't really leave if I wanted to. So yeah, so I'm here in Singapore, and I've been here for really planted the flag here 15 years ago, and it was a great part of the region to establish a business. It's safe, it's organized, it's business friendly. It does have downsides we can talk about, but it's a great place to use as a launching pad for the rest of Southeast Asia and elsewhere. So yeah, I think I chose well. And this was in 2005, 2006, and I was in my late 20s or so, and I had friends, they were starting to buy their first houses, and so they'd buy a house in 2006, and I took all my money and kind of went to Asia, and from a long-term perspective, I got lucky on that one. I think I made
Yeah,
the
the
most work.
bubble burst. Yeah, the
The bubble
housing.
burst soon
Yeah.
afterwards, so I got lucky on that one. But what our initial plan was that I was to take the marketing agency that I was a part of in Boston and out of the United States, which basically helped other companies fill their pipelines. So we did B2B marketing for other companies. And the plan was essentially, can we just replicate that and do it in Asia? I started telling my clients in the US that that's exactly what we could do. I think I actually said, oh, no, I was like, yeah, we're doing it. And I kind of got ahead of myself on that one. But very quickly, companies, clients just said, yeah, if you can do this, we're in. And so I got on a plane. It's a little bit of an unusual startup story because I got on a plane with a handful of signed contracts and landing on the other side of the planet, having to figure out how to deliver on this stuff. And
Well,
that's kind of where the book starts, which is like, okay, I've way overpromised this thing that I have no idea what I'm talking about. Now, how am I going to do this? And so that's kind of where the adventure for me at least begins. What I found was companies that all thought they wanted to do some global campaigns from a marketing perspective quickly realized that that was more complicated than they expected. There was not a universal standardized approach that was going to work. So basically what I did was we said, okay, let's bring our model over and do it in Asia. And all of our clients were saying, yeah, we're going to do our services, our products over in Asia. And it's essentially was a bunch of Westerners rushing over to the other side of the planet, trying to do things the way we were used to doing it.
mhm.
I screwed it up. They screwed it up. I got paid to help them screw it up. I mean, it was definitely a screw up, and I deliberately wrote, I hopefully, honestly, and uh, well, yeah, hopefully it's an honest account of, the mistakes that get made, because I think it's really important to talk about the mistakes so that they don't get repeated.
Absolutely. Yeah. No,
Yeah.
absolutely. It's really important. It's a learning curve, really, for anyone who starts.
Yes, and what I'm trying to do, I'm trying to just shorten that.
Yeah, no, it's interesting to hear you speak, specifically about kind of getting off the plane and kind of it sounds like the culture shock of it all. I remember my trip to Beijing for the first time and just that culture shock or being in Mumbai. I think Asia is just such a interesting place in that regard. So I think it's really cool that you were able to kind of account or think back to how everything kind of got started and kind of take, the reader through the book that way. So I think that's extremely helpful. I hope you don't mind. I want to kind of just shift gears a little bit.
Sure.
I kind of had a kind of a personal interest question. More, I know that you mentioned specifically in your profile about utilizing Sandler's sales methodologies, specifically, at your marketing group. And I'm just kind of
Yep.
curious, how, there's all these things about, global sales or enterprise sales and also about the 70-30, kind of talking thing, which I always have a little bit of a problem with. I always talk too much. So yeah, I wanted to see if you could kind of tell us a little bit about that kind of consultative selling that it seems like you're doing? Because it sounds like for sure you were kind of doing that with your client when you kind of got off the plane. And I think it's, I think that takes a lot of courage for sure.
So yeah, I think, my first sales job was a cold calling job and trying to just kind of figure out how to sell stuff to people, to strangers over the phone. And that was back in 2001. What I realized relatively quickly, I won't go into the details now, but I realized very quickly that the harder you do a sales pitch, the harder pushback you get. And so therefore you've got to actually take the opposite tact, which is you can't sell anything, right? I mean, and that's what that 30-70 split that you were talking about was. You've got to flip the script so that you're asking the questions, get the prospect talking, let them take the lead, or let them feel like they're taking the lead, and have it be much more comfortable that way. I didn't know any of this. I kind of just started figuring that out. And then I met the Sandler guys here in Singapore early on, and I put all of my guys through that program because I felt like the Sandler philosophy was very clearly aligned to my sales philosophy, which was the best salespeople are really not salespeople, or they're certainly not selling any. They're not going through the sales thing. Sandler's good because I think it's a methodology that embraces that, but it's still a methodology. And I think that what I also realized was that it's especially helpful across Southeast Asia. Anywhere in the world, sales in general, people are pretty bad at. Especially when you talk about enterprise level stuff. Most people aren't trained. There's no colleges, universities that train this. So people have these assumptions and these negative connotations of sales. There's a whole demand and need for better salespeople and sales training. And especially across Southeast Asia, because there's more hierarchies, and people generally look down on salespeople in these markets. And the expectation is, if you were in sales, you show up to my office, you tell me what you've got, and I'll tell you if I'm going to buy it. And I'm certainly going to beat you up on price. And that's the traditional relationship. And so the opportunities to break that and this still happens today. So this is not
hasn't gone away.
A past problem. This is happening today. So the individuals and the companies that can figure out how to flip that, I think, I know they have a much bigger advantage. Now, what gets interesting, I drank the Kool-Aid, so I still am to this day a big Sandler fan. I ended up partnering with them and got involved. I actually I train. I'm certified under that program. What I found was the way Sandler was conceived. It's a U.S. conceived model. And it brings with it certain cultural assumptions. It assumes certain communication styles. It assumes you can be direct with people. It assumes that hierarchies are generally flatter rather than more established. And a lot of, and this is not, I'm not trying to pick on Sandler, because this is a training and a management leadership challenge across the board. Most programs that train leaders I was talking about it this morning with coaching models. Many of these coaching models are created in the West, most of them in the US, quite frankly, and they are created based on what people observe around them. What we've done is we've done what I did, what my clients did, what everybody's done. We've thrown this to the other side of the planet and say, hey, this worked really well, so it'll obviously work really well here. And as I started delivering the training I was in the Middle East when I had my aha moment, and I wasn't in Saudi Arabia. I was training these guys whose market was Saudi, and they were just interpreting one of the tools that I was training them on in a way that I had never heard before, nor would I ever recommend, because that's not the way I would do it. And if I did that in the US, or if I did that in Singapore, I'd never be invited back. But it works in Saudi Arabia. because of these cultural differences, because of these style differences. So it was this moment where you go, the framework works, but you've got to figure out ways to localize that in a way
Absolutely.
that is effective. And if you force a standard approach, you're wasting your money. And that doesn't matter if it's sales training or management training.
And Kyle, do you think that things have, changed at all, especially since the pandemic or even over the years, specifically in Asia? You kind of touched on it a little bit about, Saudi Arabia being different and having to kind of process it different, even when you're teaching Sandler, to folks, and kind of, reimagining it, which I think is really cool. And that's exactly what you have to do in these situations. And you spoke a lot about like great things like the hierarchy kind of delivery system, especially in Japanese culture.
Yep.
I think is like a perfect example. They're used to receiving information, you sitting there telling them, and that's how they're learning. They're then not going to be questioning. They're going to more look at you as you're the authority on the subject because you're certified. So have you noticed especially during the pandemic, and kind of my own curiosity is, especially you being in Singapore, have you noticed a change? Or do you think that it's even more moving towards that way of education and customization and that kind of, personalization?
I think it's too soon to tell. In terms of if you're asking about has there been a change in 2020? If you think about it, I've been thinking a lot about it in terms of hierarchies, because what COVID brought on was a forced remote work situation for everybody. And when we talk about, let's define hierarchy. So we're talking about power distance, and the like cross-cultural phrasing is power distance, and how individuals respond to power in different ways in terms of between individuals.
Yeah.
A high power distance culture would be one that would accept their status being under or above somebody else, and it's much more defined in a high hierarchy type of place.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the world was hit by COVID, and everybody said, okay, go home and go work from home. The company cultures that have a flat hierarchy, and this is mainly tech companies, they generally come from a flat hierarchy. An example could be, we don't have business cards, or like everybody can walk in and say what they want, right?
Yeah.
That's totally foreign in most other parts of the world. You just can't do it, just not how things work. But all of a sudden, everybody's now working from home, working remotely. Everybody's autonomous. The word autonomous is almost the opposite of hierarchy. In a hierarchical organization, you wait to be told what to do from the boss. But now all of a sudden you're on your own, and everyone's saying, okay, work from home, get it done. And I think that the hierarchical companies, the hierarchical businesses are the ones that are struggling the most with this change. And they're realizing very quickly that the way they're used to do that stuff. So I guess the long way of saying that is that I think COVID has rapidly flattened companies, and the response to that is still being understood and interpreted. But there are a lot of
the companies that were actually like prepared to handle this are the ones that seem to be, the ones that were a bit flatter. I think you're making a really good point. Yeah. So I think that, and then another kind of question along those lines is, has your growth strategy changed with your organization? Has there, because the reason why I love these questions, or I love asking these questions, is because there's so many different responses from so many different folks, from different industry verticals, especially, but, from a cultural standpoint, especially being over in Asia, I think it's really interesting to kind of hear how that's going for you.
I'm kind of half smiling because my biggest clients were in airlines and hotels last year. So
Mm.
my growth strategy certainly changed at the beginning of this year. But
Yeah,
and the strategy for this year was to get the book out, and the entire marketing plan was, I'm the global business nomad, so I'm going to fly around the planet and meet up in
totally.
face to face in
Yeah.
large groups, and I'm going to talk about this stuff to anybody who's willing to listen. And so obviously all of that got wiped out. What also got wiped out was some of the supply chain. So it became
Yeah.
difficult to get books to different organizations.
Awesome.
The book launch happened here in Singapore last week. Guess what? No books here.
Mm.
No books. I've got 20 or so here, but those are the books that are in my hometown, and the launch was last week. Um, this is what we're up against, right? So it's
Yeah.
about trying to figure out, how do we adapt to this? Where do I zig and zag based on this? So, you talk about a growth strategy. Growth is not probably the word that's on my radar at the moment. It is trying to figure out just smart and quite frankly, like reasonable ways to adapt to working through these different obstacles and not go
Yeah.
crazy at the whole. Yeah. There's a
Yeah.
weird answer.
Without the overreaction. So yeah, that makes sense.
No, it's
Yeah.
thank you. That's very honest answer. Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It's with the pandemic and how difficult it is, especially in this industry, I suppose, and all the supply chains that you mentioned. I just want to talk about the book a little bit, and because the title is very intriguing. You say it's a survival guide, so we can talk about survival, especially currently, with the pandemic. So I'm quoting: the perfect book for anyone working in a cross-cultural setting, whether as part of a global team or independently, establishing new business initiatives away from their home country. Can you tell us a little bit more about the book, and what can anyone expect from it? That's such an important topic, as you mentioned, to be able to, as an expat myself, understand how to adapt, in a different country. And that's not something that everybody gets right away. It takes years sometimes for
And
businesses.
and yeah, and so the book was conceived and written all before 2020. So this is all pre-pandemic. A point I was trying to make at the beginning of the book, which turned out to be pretty prescient, was people are now working globally, whether they travel or not. I think the quote I had, or the line was, global nomads sometimes don't even have passports. And the reason is because so many of us are working in a digital environment. In some ways, this whole thing just got accelerated. So I don't think my argument and my thesis for any of this has changed. If anything, it's become more applicable here in 2020. What most people experience is when they move physically to another part of the world, they notice these challenges, right? They start sensing that that meeting didn't go the way I expected it, or something else. I'm starting to see things are different.
Mm-hmm.
The challenge with doing this remotely is that you don't see all of that stuff. You don't see what happens when the video camera ends at the end of a Zoom call, and the small chatter and the subgroups that happen. And so if you are managing a team from your own country, and your team is distributed in all these different parts of the world,
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of stuff, that invisible stuff that's going on, that will take a lot longer for you to realize, at least realize the hard way.
Yeah.
And so what I'm trying to do here is say, okay, let me walk you through some expat examples of what I'm trying to convey here. So how do you put definition to some of these invisible working style differences? If I can get people to have those aha moments without them having to make the same mistakes, that's fantastic. The survival guide is really to say, okay, there are a couple of key ideas that I want people to walk out of here with, which is what everybody, I think, should do as a starting point. It's almost a very American approach to thinking about, like, what's the shortcut? What's like, gun to your head, like, what's the 3 things I need to know to work globally? And in some ways, it's kind of a dumb question, because it's not like going to ever really solve the problem. But if you did put a gun to my head and say, what are
Mhm.
the three things that people need to start doing? I would say they need to start better understanding themselves in terms of their working styles.
Mhm.
And let's define some working styles. So, how are you motivated? How do you communicate? We've mentioned this already. How do you build relationships?
Mhm.
How do you deal with confrontation? How do you deal with time? All of these types of things. You've got to know how you sit on that spectrum. Actually,
That's
even taking a step back, you've got to realize that there's spectrums.
I actually really, and I listened, as I told you, to a podcast that you were on previously, and Catherine Bussman. So I definitely give that nod
There you go.
to the
She's great.
worldly marker because she's fantastic. But
Yes.
yeah, I thought it was really something I thought was really interesting with all of that is that, and it kind of reminded me of some things that you were talking about, but just kind of the things that you have to learn, kind of what not, it's more like what not to do. I mean, I remember being on those airplanes and, going to places where I knew that culture shock would take hold, and trying to brush up on making sure you don't make just etiquette mistakes, or you don't
Right.
insult someone by accident,
Yes.
and I think that's kind of where I think what's really interesting about your book is I think that's kind of where everybody kind of starts, and then there's this kind of understanding as you're kind of going through and over the years and learning from the different cultures and learning, what's taboo and what's not. And so, yeah, I think it's really interesting for
The
sure.
other part too is how to try and read those cues or the communication styles. And I'll give you a very recent, this happened last week. I was
Yeah.
very proud of myself for decoding this. I use this microphone for my podcast that we're in, and it's a very nice microphone. And I was doing a small workshop, actually small coachings, like four people, and there was a guy from Taiwan, and he was on the call first before the call started. And so we were all kind of fiddling, like you normally do on a Zoom call. And I got up, and he told me before anybody else showed up, he's a very quiet guy, very friendly, very thoughtful. And he just said, he didn't see the microphone. He just said, you have a very good microphone.
Yeah, good. That's
Thank you.
excellent that he picked. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
excellent he
Well,
picked up on
no,
that.
no, no.
Yeah.
So here's where indirect communication kicks in. Right across the hallway from my office right here is my bathroom.
Ah.
Whoa.
Before things started,
Mm,
I ran over, used the bathroom, and what he was very kindly telling me
Actually
is that
saying,
accurate?
this stuff is getting picked up.
oh, wow.
That was how he was telling me this. Now, this is a perfect example of indirect
Culture. Yeah.
communication,
Yeah.
right? And this happens in places all. So this was somebody who was trying to help me by saying, he was trying, but
Politely. Yeah.
culturally, it would be too rude or insensitive to
To
say
say,
something directly.
yeah.
So he was doing his best effort to try and do that. And quite frankly, I thought initially he was just complimenting my microphone. And then after the call, I kind of sat back and just had a minute. It's like, there's got to be another reason he said that. And then it all clicked. And so there's your weird 2020 example of indirect communication and how to decode some of this stuff when you're doing virtual team building.
Yeah.
Fantastic example. I mean, that's just it's a great example to illustrate, and especially in a professional relationship, the importance of really understanding how to adapt and work efficiently. With people all around the world. Happens to all of us. So I suppose whether you just moved to a different country or you work with people around the planet. So thank you so much. Can you expand a little bit? I'd like to come back to your current role at TSL Marketing. Can you expand a little bit about the specific type of services that you provide for your clients and how you help them maybe?
We started out here, as I had mentioned, saying we're going to be a marketing agency, and we're going to deliver global marketing campaigns. And that quickly became apparent that not only could we not deliver that the way we thought we could, but that's not actually what clients wanted anyway. For example, a big company would say, we had success with you in the US, do that over in Asia. But then you talk to the local companies or the local teams from that same organization, and they don't want to be told what to do from US headquarters. So all of a sudden, it's an agency being run by a big white guy, right? Big American guy. No, why would we be told what to do from people on the other side of the planet? And then they're bringing these foreign guys in. It was a very difficult sell, and it was very difficult to make that work properly. What they wanted to do was to have more of a local solution. Fair enough. We were able, I think, to adapt fairly well. So we, over the years, ended up hiring and developing our own local flavor and delivery approach. Southeast Asia is incredibly difficult to do that because of the language differences that I'm sure you both know very well, and the complications that arise simply from the language piece, the culture piece as well. You can't just do a campaign and expand it from Singapore into Malaysia, into Thailand, into Vietnam, into China. There are so many moving pieces that each of them have to be looked at as almost a separate standalone campaign. Things don't scale the same way that some parts of the world are used to. So we wrestled with that. What I did over the years was, we still do it to a degree, the marketing stuff, but more often I spend most of my time doing sales training and communications training and consulting with companies. So the company has evolved not 180 degrees, but we've gone from a marketing agency into more of a communications consulting agency, which focuses on sales, negotiation, and cross-cultural team building. And so it's been a pretty big change from that standpoint, but we changed because that's what we saw the market opportunity pointing us towards. And if we had forced the standard approach that we had come in here thinking, wouldn't have worked. I mean, it would have been okay, but it wouldn't have been very fulfilling.
Yeah, no, obviously I understand. Sorry, go ahead, Michael.
No, I just said kind of
that's like I'm again exhibit A of a localization play. I mean, we didn't come in here with this amazing, brilliant, strategy. It just we kind of flubbed our way through it and figured it out. But it's
no, I think the education there is perfect for explaining that to folks, that you can't just sit there. And I think we get that a lot at Vistatec, where clients think that they just translate it, throw it over the fence to us, and then the magic happens, right? So we totally, I think we can completely relate with that, right, Priscilla. So yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. I wanted to ask, back a little bit. I know we keep kind of bouncing around a little bit between, your company and also the book. And I know you commented about the word foreign and how, and I guess what I'm wondering is, in the rapid kind of digital kind of first age that we're in here right now, especially with all of this and the widespread, with the widespread kind of chat platforms like Zoom and MS Teams and that kind of thing. Are you feeling kind of any, are you feeling like an urgency with the changed business landscape? Are you sensing that from a cultural standpoint, being in Singapore? And then, what are I know this is kind of a weird question too, is how are you quickly getting people trained up for global work environments? Because, for cross-cultural kinds of situations, I'm also very curious, have you received feedback about the collaborations and the things that come out of all of that? Because I know you and I have talked about that a little bit before, like cross-cultural collaboration. I've had a lot of really good experiences with that. How have you felt that's all kind of, and I know that's kind of like a
there's like three or four questions there. So
yes, I apologize for that.
No, that's okay. What I'm getting is some companies come to me and they go, right, we are now just nobody's talking to one another. The offices in different parts of the world have siloed up. and it's us versus them. And London is saying that Singapore doesn't get anything done, and Singapore is saying, oh, London just sends us all their stuff because they're not willing to be on a call after 5. And the France office is saying that it's illegal for anybody to respond to an email after 6 o'clock. And it's, and so the inability to meet up, the inability to actually sort some of this stuff out. What people are trying to do is they're trying to fix problems via email, right? And I don't know about you, but I don't, if you've ever
Management
seen
by email, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you've ever seen a problem escalate via email, which we all have seen, can you name one time where it was actually resolved properly via email? It's not. It always escalates, being like, all right, let's get on a call. Let's get on a Zoom call. And that right now is the best we've got, which is this type of video environment. The work that I'm trying to do is to hopefully preempt that stuff, to get teams across these different places to sit down. And I use this data that I've alluded to earlier, which is to say, look, there's cross-cultural data out here that it doesn't answer all the questions, but it's a great starting point to start defining what some of these potential work differences might even look like. When we talk about the difference between communication styles, when we talk about the difference between like the silly bathroom example. Well, you could kind of fast forward that in a big company or any company environment where someone goes, you know what? That guy just pisses me off because he doesn't speak up. He doesn't say what is really on his mind. I have to sit here and decode everything. Like I'm not working with him anymore. And this other guy could be thinking the exact opposite. So what I'm seeing is the stress of everyday life of remote work, I think, is starting to build. So I'm getting these kind of calls, and quite frankly, it's not strategic. It's more putting out fires, which is fine.
Yeah.
We can work on that as a starting point, but hopefully people are realizing in this, whatever this is, there needs to be a more thoughtful approach to remote work. Some people are going back to offices. That's going to create other problems as well, because not everybody's going back. So now we've got this hybrid thing that's popping up, and you're going to get silos from that. You're going to get the people that are in the office versus the remote workers happening. And I'm trying to work with different companies on different strategies for that. The second question you asked is, again, I think goes back to that kind of speed answer, which is I put together only over the last couple of months, I took 5 main tools that I think are the most important things from the survival guide, the survival kit that I talked about from the book. And it's a virtual workshop that individuals can join on. And that's been going really well. That's fun because we do a deep dive for an hour and we meet once a week. And at the end of that 5-week program, you've got a little bit of a deep dive survival kit, is to say, okay, here are the communication tools. Here's how I can think about myself. Here's how I can understand the data that I've alluded to. And then here are some specific ways that we can start building communication in a stronger way within teams. That seems to have been, it's starting to pick up pretty well at an individual level.
And with like multinationals specifically, do you think that they are starting to get these things right? Or do you still think that there's a lot of, especially some of the larger ones, I've seen obviously like different maturity levels when it comes to, global environments and things and multicultural teams. Do you think they're starting to get more sensitive to those things or do you think that those things are, and if they are still getting it wrong, why do you think they're still getting it wrong?
My knee-jerk reaction is no, they're not doing anything different. But that's not fair. I think that I haven't seen large companies as a whole who have just cracked the code and figured this out. I've seen individual leaders and teams who have become bulletproof, or they've really developed a tight-knit communication style and building trust among each other. And so I've seen that, which I think is fantastic.
Yeah.
Is it getting better? Again, like 2020 is just such a weird, I have no idea what the trend line is looking like. I have generally in the last 15 years been surprised at the fact that the conversations, that the problems of cross-cultural teams have been exactly the same. So I have not seen a general improvement in that. And I think what you asked as a follow-up was why, if that's the case. A lot of times these issues are brushed under the carpet. And I think it's because people don't want to talk about these types of failures. I think that this topic is tricky. You can very
Yeah.
quickly get into the realm of stereotyping and negative generalizations if you're not
Yeah.
careful about it. It's very easy for these things to turn into rants and pointing fingers. Oh, well, these people are always like this, and these people do this. Like, we have to be real careful with that.
Yeah.
And I think a
Yeah.
lot of times companies have just been hands off about it. It's been easy to be hands off about it when the markets are going up, when you're growing, when your stocks are
Yeah.
going up. Now, as we're, I think, heading into some darker, stormier times,
I'd have to agree.
now is where those issues that have been pushed under the rug, I think these are going to start rearing their head. Companies can't get away with the kind of shenanigans that they could get away with if you've got a growth market that's going crazy and yeah, we're dysfunctional, but we're still growing. So who cares?
How do you get them out
Yeah,
of that mind? How are you getting them out of that mindset? I
I'm
guess because
not. The market is. I'm not
okay.
getting them out of the mindset.
Yeah.
I get the phone call after the fear comes in. Quite frankly, I mean, I can, you know, I can. There are some people that get it and they know that this is something that they need to do. Generally, though, the call comes in after the problems start, which that's how life works. I mean, I wish I could tell you otherwise, but I think that when the I think we're heading towards some really difficult economic times in the next year or so. I think, hopefully I'm wrong, but
I hope you're wrong, but I kind of happen to agree with you. But yes, go
Yeah.
on.
and I think that what'll happen is that there need to be some strategic decisions as to what these companies are going to do from a global perspective. The growth markets were very sexy and fun if they're growing. If they're
Yeah.
not growing, all of a sudden people stop thinking about the growth statistic and start looking at the spending, right? How much,
Yeah.
like there's a lot of people that were growing like crazy but also losing money like crazy, and they were getting away with it because it was all about the growth. But if the growth
Yeah.
stops and the money keeps coming out, some very big decisions have to be made. And if you've got a dysfunctional team, that's going to make that even more difficult, because the mistake that happened back in the last downturn, 2008, 2009, 2010, was a
Yeah.
lot of, in this case, Western companies, they just closed shop in Southeast Asia, or they just brought it down to like just a surviving heartbeat. And they pissed off a lot of people because they didn't do it very well. You know, they just
Mm.
immediately laid off people. They treated people poorly. They didn't follow up with vendors, partners. So, you know, companies have to be very careful about their short-term behavior, because that comes back to bite them. Because what they come back to is markets where there are local competitors here that are stronger than ever before. So
Yeah.
the world is changing.
Yeah, I agree with you, Kyle. I'm just curious, like, do you think that there's in those particular situations with these multinationals, are you seeing, you know, because one of the things we're seeing a lot right now is stuff having to do with user experience, customer experience, and there's a focus on that to a degree, things being more inclusive, accessible, personalized, which I all think is fantastic progress, you know, as in global business, especially since it's being embraced like it's being. But I'm curious, like, you know, you're taught basic economics is when things are kind of heading in a downturn, you're supposed to kind of invest then, because that's when your competitors, you know, maybe are taking a much more conservative approach.
Yep.
Just curious, you know, just, you know, again, is are you seeing more investment in things that are a little bit more outside the box? Do you feel like people are more apt to be more open with things, or are they being more open with things because they've been forced to be, especially with with the pandemic not being over and kind of the aftermath or the eventual aftermath?
There's it's I wish you I can give you another answer in a couple of days. I'm meeting up with a couple of guys tomorrow who are they're investors in markets like Vietnam and Indonesia. And I'm very curious to see what they've got going on, because I know that they've got money that they're trying to invest. The problem that they've got is they can't get there. They need to physically see this stuff and kick the tires, because this has been slowing them down. And so in the very short term, things are slowing down because they physically can't move around and check stuff out. But there's money there. And there are a lot of people that are thinking the same way that you just framed that, which is, we get the fact that downturn means go time. Downturn means that the talent pool has just increased. COVID means that the talent pool not only has increased because of the downturn, but it's multiplied more than ever before, because now we're working remotely. And it doesn't matter if I'm next door to you, Michael, or if I'm on the other side of the planet. If I'm the talent that you're looking for, now we can work together a hell of a lot easier than we could even a year ago. And so I keep saying it to like HR people, your resume pools probably are going to go up by about 1 billion. So there's some massive, I think we're at the beginning of some massive
too many
change.
People available, unfortunately.
I'm sorry, say that again.
Sorry. I said too many people available, unfortunately.
No question. In the short term, this stuff is ugly. This is going, and who knows where it's going to go, but this is a time of massive disruption, but also, you've got to kind of look at, I kind of also joke, I say, we're all going to be, hopefully we're on a call in 6 months or 12 months where someone's figured out a model that's just so amazing, and they've built a company from nothing into multiple thousands of employees, and you and I are, all three of us are going like what? It was,
you're like, why? Yeah, totally, absolutely. Yeah, that makes.
But I love that stuff. I think it's great. That gives me hope and enthusiasm for where the stuff's going.
Yeah, innovation comes from crisis, right? So I think that's
putting the word innovation is so important, because like you put that into a cross-cultural perspective, because what I've seen, if you don't have communication across your different offices, if you're missing those cues, you're missing opportunities. And I'll give you an example. Not that you asked, but I'll give you one anyway. A client of mine in India is in the job portal space, right?
Yep.
And it's a US-based company. And the market, as you know, in India is incredibly different than in the US. In fact, it's so different that it's not even a market. Like there's multiple markets within India. There's a new phrase going on. It's called internal globalization, which they're trying to push in India, which is like, hey guys, why don't we figure out how to work with each other, because we're such a diverse country. And so like India is a complicated, crazy place. What they were finding in one sub-market of India was that there were massive layoffs happening because of AI. And this was happening in the financial insurance industries. And, India layoffs are different than US or European layoffs. They don't do layoffs in hundreds. They do layoffs in thousands or tens of thousands, just as they do hiring in tens of thousands. So they were getting companies who were saying, look, we're about to lay off 10,000 people. Can you help them? And this particular company was saying, no, we don't do that. It's just not like, nobody in the boardroom back in the United States was sitting around on their whiteboard in their big fancy boardroom going, oh, like what solution would we have if this happened? Like, that's not how they think, which is fair enough. But on the other side of the planet, a problem was happening that they would never have been able to predict. One of two things can happen. One, the local India team just says no, hangs up the phone, nothing happens. Opportunity completely missed. Or two, do you have a company culture where that type of thing can get communicated? Do you have trust and the ability for some person who's been on that call with a client to speak up to somebody else? Do they have the guts to speak up to headquarters? Does headquarters have the open-mindedness to hear it, to actually
Mm,
hear it, and to do
yeah.
something about it? And in this case, thankfully, that all worked, where somebody back in the US said, good Lord, this sounds like, obviously it's awful, but maybe we can help these people. Maybe there's a product where we can help people in the tens of thousands figure out
True.
what they're going to do next. We had never thought of that. This is a new product offering based on a local challenge that has just popped up. But I will tell you, 9 times out of 10, those local problems that pop up do not get communicated back to headquarters. And if they do, headquarters ignores it. So that's where the opportunities, I think, are massively happening, in companies of all sizes right now.
Tell us more just about your experience working overseas and the challenges of organizations accepting a global mindset. When you're located, as an American in Asia, and then they happen to be in North America or Europe, trying to better understand that, like, Asia-based markets. How is, I guess, it's a little bit. I'm curious, just from the book sense, and we've talked a little bit about that, how you're getting people to adopt a global mindset.
I'm a believer in, and the book is not a business book. I mean, if you've taken the time if you've got into it, like it's a narrative, right? It's a story driven thing. And then there's some data and hopefully some ideas that come out of it, not the opposite. So it's not like, here's the idea and here's a mini example that I just made up. It's kind of, I flipped it on this one.
Mhm.
I'm a very big believer in communicating via story rather than just facts and figures. So to me, the big way to drive global mindset is to figure out that formula where the way I say it is that persuasion happens when a good story meets great data. And what I
Yeah.
mean by that is you need to have both if you're going to get people if you're going to change minds. You can't go back to headquarters and say, you don't understand. Asia's different. You don't understand. The Irish market is different than this. And like you people don't understand. Most of us are guilty of kind of that, finger wagging and bit complaining about it. Whereas what we need to do instead is to say, okay, let me give you this quick example of what I've just seen. Let's use that India example that I just told you. So that was a story of one company that experienced that. Now, what if I were to add the fact that in the last 12 months, 200,000 people have been laid off due to AI changes in Bangalore alone? I just made that number up. But if you had like real data that said, okay, here's an example of innovation. Here's the data that backs up the change that's actually happening. Here's the idea. So in other words, can you put that into some type of formula so that people can be able to tell stories in a more calibrated type of way? I think
Mhm.
that's one of the most powerful tools that I try and coach people on. I call it calibrated storytelling. It's just combining that
I
story
like that.
element with
With data.
hard factual data.
Yeah, no, I think that's really interesting. I know in your book you mentioned communication contracts. Could you tell us just a little bit more about communication contracts? You
Communication
explain.
contracts it's a big picture idea because the way people can execute on it can have massive variation to it. Essentially, the idea is it's having an adult to an adult honest conversation with your team, hopefully at the beginning of a relationship, but it can happen at any time, to lay core ground rules for what's going to be expected, what's going to be tolerated, what's going to happen if those agreements are broken. Uh, I've been using those a lot with teams that quickly went to A/B test or A/B phase, meaning like, okay, we can have 5 people come in from on this week, and then another 5 come in next week, and they've never done that before. So this split teaming had challenges. So it was like, okay, we need to write a communication contract for this team that establishes what are the new ground rules here. How are we going to agree on what communication style is going to work. What technology platforms are we going to use? So many companies started throwing all of these different things, right? Are we on Zoom today? Should I be on WhatsApp? Is it Skype? Are we on Microsoft today? I sent you a text. Why didn't you respond to that? Like, well, because I wasn't on the chat tool, right? Like all of this stuff can cause headaches. So I believe it's up to small teams to just say, okay, look, let's just come up with an agreement as to what this is going to be about. If you have time zones, let's agree to what that time zone situation looks like. Can we agree that if you get a response from me and it's 2 a.m. your time, nobody's going to be upset if you don't respond until the next day?
Yeah.
Can we also agree that if knowing the time zones are here, that can we be a little bit more proactive about what our recommended next step is? For example, I'm playing back and forth with somebody in New York this week, and I gave 3 times for to have a conversation, and she wrote back. She goes, "Yeah, that time's not good for me." Okay, so, but like if you are having a conversation and both of you are in one state or one part of the world, that's okay because it's back and forth, right? But she's sending that note to me and it's 10 o'clock and I'm not responding until the next day. So what would normally turn into a 2-minute, 5-minute back and forth, now we're talking about 24 hours. And so it's almost literally those little types of changes to how we communicate can make a massive difference.
Yeah, we know something a little bit about that. And I think what's interesting in that situation, as you kind of talked about it, just from a cultural standpoint, obviously, I worked for a China-based organization for a long time, and their hours, were crazy hours, and they were always happy because I was kind of, night kind of person, and they were like, "Do you ever sleep?" And so they were like very happy that I was like that, not really realizing that most, Americans are not going to be like that. And then of course, Priscilla, you could attest this, Europe is even more so, where it's very strict. Everybody's very balanced. It's not very strict. It's more strict in terms of time, in terms of, work time balance with life, a work-life balance. So I think that, what you're touching on is really kind of funny, and very interesting, in that sense as well. I know this is kind of like an offbeat question a little bit, but my experience with Asia and just kind of seeing how things kind of progress or have changed over the past decade plus, do you get the sense? And I was listening to another podcast, and there was this gentleman on the podcast who was speaking specifically about China, and he was talking about how there's like these waves of change that have gone on over the past decade in China in terms of their openness, as far as, what do they need expats for, right? In those types of situations, or Americans like myself back in the day to be located in the US to help them, grow business here. Do you sense that too, that there's been this change? And do you think that are those markets any different working in Singapore, going into China versus now, some of the other emerging markets like Vietnam, and Indonesia and some of the others?
The waves analogy is absolutely fitting and I think correct. I think about it as a pendulum, same thing. So what happens is, I don't know if it's nationalism or protectionism, but there are moments or eras where all of a sudden, we need to hire locals, and the locals need to be taking over because this has gone too far. In Singapore is exhibit A of this. In fact, there is daily headlines right now. The Ministry of Employment, Ministry of Manpower, is going after foreign companies if they don't hire and promote enough locals. And so what they're doing is they're now starting to name and shame organizations that aren't to their, whatever, doing that. They're calling it discriminatory hiring practices. And the message is that they are stopping foreign work pass holders from coming in, and they're actually starting to cancel them. So what's happened this year is that people are leaving. And so that's from a wave standpoint, that's the direction we're heading in. We're heading in a local hire standpoint. this is not the first wave. This is not the first pendulum swing.
Yeah.
You know, your phrase of 10 years. Yeah, that was one of them. When I was here, or before I got here, talking to the old grizzled expats before I got here, they were telling the same story from the 90s. And I'm sure the story from the 80s was the same. This is not, I don't think this is anything new. I do think it seems to vary from country to country. I know that the same thing's happening in Thailand right now. So there is it's not an anti-foreigner sentiment, but it's definitely a, Thailand first, Singapore first, China first, India first, America first. Is that a thing?
I knew that one was coming. So yeah, and that it's interesting, because of the fact that it's being in global business. It's kind of like, you see this kind of stuff going on, and you're just kind of like, you don't really kind of understand the national. I mean, you do and you don't. You understand where it's coming from. Yeah. At the same time, to me, it should be the opposite now that things are more digitized. So
the prime minister here had a, and I wish I'm paraphrasing what he said a couple of weeks ago. He said, over the last decade, this has been about figuring out how to grow the global pie. He said, now that growth has stopped and countries are figuring out how they can grab the pieces of pie without thinking about how to work together to grow it. And we need to be aware.
Not very forward thinking. Yeah.
What's
that? Go ahead. I said it's not very forward thinking.
No, he wasn't saying it as a, like, this is what he was, what his point was we need to not be naive to the fact that globalization from a traditional standpoint, that what we've been used to in the last 10 years, this has changed. And if you think that, it's all about, if you think it's business as usual beforehand, it's not. And as a small little country, I almost said company, but there's kind of a Freudian slip there. They need to be very cautious and aware of that change, of the fact that supply chains are coming back, not necessarily domestically, but certainly regionally. And so his point wasn't gloom and doom. I thought he hit a good balanced tone, which was to say, we need to figure out how to get back to that growth mindset as quickly as we can. But we also have to be aware that the tone of global business has shifted. And so that's maybe where that wave analogy is a good one, because it's like, you're not going to control the tides. The best thing you can do is to figure out how to ride them.
Yeah, no, I mean, that makes complete sense. Do you think that's created more opportunities for emerging markets in Vietnam, Indonesia, Taiwan?
The
Thailand,
China specific situation has. China is kind of its own unique beast, which is a different conversation, and quite frankly, one that I'm not qualified to have.
Yeah.
I'm sure you've got contacts that are your China experts. What I am seeing though is certainly an increased focus on those other markets that you've named. And again, I'm interested to have my my meetup with my friends who are focused.
We'll have to splice that. We'll have to splice that in.
Absolutely.
Here. Updated version, right?
Vietnam is really the one that's going crazy right now in terms of opportunities.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting.
Yeah.
And speaking of taking business, keeping business locally, but also expanding globally, you mentioned in your book that organizations around the world have gone global. But the big problem that we've got is that people haven't. And if you're not going into domestic market anymore, you're working globally. So do you have any tips for individual organizations who are looking to adapt to a global working environment?
I think it goes back to what we talked about. Yeah, I think it goes back to what we talked about earlier, which is that survival guide, which is, the first thing you've got to do is get a better sense in terms of where you sit on all of these spectrums. And actually even going back a step further, which is people have to be willing to acknowledge that there are other working styles out there and that those other working styles work. And that's actually a really important point. I had a meeting. I just signed on I'm doing a coaching project with somebody, and we did sort of a first date. Like we needed to figure out if it was going to make sense to work together. And the one thing I was interested in was, does this person think, and is this person convinced that his way is the right way? Because if that's the case, I can't help him.
Right.
That's a fair point.
And thankfully, you know, he was going, look, like I have my opinions and I've seen things that work, but I've also realized like there's stuff going on that I don't understand. Like I need help. Like I'm willing to acknowledge that there's more than one way to get from point A to point B. And maybe that's even the first thing, which is that like your way might be the right way, but it's not the only way. And
Right.
if you're not willing to consider that, stay where you are and don't look overseas, because it's not going to be pretty.
It's a good qualifying question.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's great.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, from that perspective, yeah, it's a great qualifying question. And yeah, Michael, did you want to ask a question regarding Kyle's recent podcast with Katrin Bassman?
Yeah, I know. Oh, I know what you're speaking about specifically. Yeah, I mean, and obviously we could probably talk about a lot of this, you know, all day long. But meaning with Kyle, because I think it's just interesting hearing these different perspectives and just all the things and changes that are going on. You know, so I definitely like that, and the book, you know, and the idea behind the book, I think is fantastic. One of the things I thought was really funny from that podcast is, and maybe you could just, because I think it's always kind of great to tell these types of stories, is that you mentioned during that podcast, or with Catherine's podcast, it was about this story with these, you know, slapping dragons onto marketing pieces, you know, specifically for Asian markets, and that was kind of like the thought process to replace, you know, baseball in kind of a marketing campaign. And so I guess, do you have, you know, any funny, tragic, or kind of expensive mistakes, or any little, I love those types of stories just because I think they're interesting to hear, because we get to learn from bad decisions.
I always like adding new stuff to these conversations, and I don't like telling stories from the book, because when, you know, I always get frustrated when an author tells all the same stories, then I buy the book and then it's the same stuff I've just heard. So
Yeah.
I've tried to kind of keep it outside. Yeah, I'm a working case study right now. This book process has been interesting because it's had a very we've wrestled with the global rollout for this whole thing. The book, small thing, which is interesting, when a book goes live, so it's a kind of a US centric starting point where the book was published. When it goes live overseas, so we were celebrating our launch back in, I think, August 27th of the international launch. Well, it doesn't go live until West Coast US time, noon, which is actually not even like the 27th. So
Right.
the book launch, you couldn't get the ebook, you couldn't get the audio book the day it launched, because it was basing itself off of the US time zone.
Yeah.
And that was some
So
of
they
those,
had the
like,
wrong date. Yeah.
so it was kind of like, wow, you know, like here we are, we're still getting that stuff wrong. The audio book is narrated by a professional. It sounds great. He's really good, but the book has a lot of characters from different parts of the world. And the audiobook trend now is that they do accents. And so you've got this guy who is doing accents, and
For those characters.
for all of those characters. So you've got different dialects across the US, fine. Then you've got British. I don't think there's any Irish characters. You've got Dutch. You've got Singaporean,
French?
Filipino, Chinese, Australian, And this guy, he goes for it, and it's pretty entertaining.
He goes for it. That's funny.
I think yeah. So like, here we are talking about awareness and differences, and I'm not sure how that's going to go down. I
Yeah,
have
it's
to,
better. It's better than machine voice because we've
no
seen that
question, no
in
question.
courses, so and other
I,
things in
I
audio
got,
books and stuff.
yeah, I went out and went for a run and listened to it, and I was a little bit questioning it, and now I'm just kind of owning it. So I'm just going to go for it. But
But see,
so
now we're full circle, Kyle. We're back to the cultural kind of the worries about insensitivity, right, or the stereotypes that go along with it.
yes,
So
yep.
I think it's kind of funny in the book. I'll have to listen to the audio because I can't wait to hear this guy's different accents.
Absolutely. You being someone from, experiencing so many different accents, both of you, I think you'll certainly put a smile to your face.
Oh, I was going to say, one thing I think that would be very interesting, in the future is some kind of workshop, maybe example, like how, especially in what we do with Vistatec, a workshop that's specifically about how, you go into these multinationals, like an
Yep.
example of one of these workshops, I think would be kind of interesting in the future, just to kind of see, what kind of goes on internally within organizations to train them up for global business.
Well, I'll tell you
So I
what's
think
been,
that'd be interesting.
yeah. Yeah, no, and I'll tell you what's been actually I'm doing this now with a university out of the U.S. and we'll definitely roll this out to organizations as well. We're taking the characters from the book and we're building case studies off of those as working examples that will help people. So, for example, there's a deep dive character study on a woman who goes over from the U.S. and sets up her own business, or she opens an office in Singapore, and what she goes through. But not only from the logistics side of things, but from a hiring and managing side of things, and with some of the challenges that we talked about. So then we go, okay, read this chapter, and now let's talk about what would you advise her if this was day one and she was coming in? What would you advise her after the first year, after she has she's fired two people? What's your advice to her? What should the company think about doing after year two when she's decided she's going back to the States? Who's going to replace her? What are the characteristics so anyway, and you can go into there's 20 questions that you can have teams go out. And so what we're doing is really cool, actually. I'm using Zoom and some other platforms to have these team-based learning exercises where they've got to go and really work through some of these questions that are absolutely applicable to organizations and teams. And it's nice because it's safe, right? It's like, we're not talking about you, company X. We're talking about this hypothetical that just happens to be very aligned to the challenges that you're facing. Let's practice, let's role play this through in a safe environment and just put ideas out so that when we come back and now we can think differently about how we're going to actually strategically decide on what our next step is going to be. So I'm happy to talk about that at another point, but those deep dive case studies are really where we're taking this book, which I'm really excited about.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's really exciting.
Yeah.
Definitely very useful to anyone. Always helps you relate to any situation. So, well, my last question to you really is there anything else you'd like to share with the audience today? Any other project that you've been working on the side? Anything specific? Anything related to the book and the recent launch?
So yeah, there's a couple of workshops that I'm doing, both public and corporate. So individuals can jump on to these workshops. Super simple. I've got 3 of them based on APAC timing, European timing, and American North America timing,
Yeah.
which covers some of those 5 key things. If there are 5 things I want people to take away in terms of building global leadership skills, in terms of communication, this is the fast and easy way to do it. That's been working out really well. And then we do a corporate version of that. As I just said, we've had tons of success and positive feedback on doing deep dive case study work on some of the characters from the book. And that's been getting really good feedback. My website, Leadership Nomad, is the best place to find me. So leadershipnomad.com. Obviously the book is the book. It's out everywhere, hopefully everywhere. And yeah.
No, I've been reading your reviews on Amazon. It's out everywhere.
Out everywhere.
Everywhere.
Yes.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Kyle, and thanks, Michael.
Thank you, Kyle.
No, it was a pleasure to have you today. Thank you for your time. We appreciate, especially you being in Singapore, Michael being in the United States, me being in Ireland. It's a real, we couldn't make it more global, I think, time zone wise. So
we
it's
took
been
care of that time zone problem. Yeah, we
made it work.
We made it work, so thank you so much. It is already the end of today's show, unfortunately, with Kyle Hegarty, Managing Director at TSL Marketing and author of the Accidental Business Nomad, a survival guide for working across a shrinking planet, and our very own Vistatec, Michael J. Asquith. So please make sure to tune in again to see and or listen to the next VistaTalks show with more interesting people and interesting discussion from all around the world. Thank you.